A mysterious man with a hidden past, a photo of Clara's mother, and a truth buried for years. Will Clara uncover the shocking secret that could change everything? Watch to find out. It was just past midnight when the soft hum of the neon sign outside barely pierced the stillness of the diner. Clara Jennings, wiping down the counter with the last bit of energy she had left, couldn't help but feel the weight of the long shift settling in. The quiet was both comforting and unnerving, a lull in the constant buzz of her life. She had just finished restocking the sugar packets when the bell above the door jingled softly, signaling the entrance of a new customer. She looked up, expecting another tired soul stumbling in for a late-night cup of coffee. But this time, the man who walked in was different. He wasn't like the usual crowd of sleepy travelers or regulars nursing their last drink before heading home. This man was tall, dressed in an immaculate black suit that spoke volumes about his wealth, probably more than she'd ever earned in her entire life. His shoes clicked sharply on the floor, his every step measured, his posture straight, like someone who owned the world. His eyes scanned the diner briefly, as if he was used to being in charge of every room he entered. Clara couldn't look away. He was striking in a way that made her stomach tighten, as if the very presence of him demanded attention. She approached his booth hesitantly, a slight flutter in her chest, and asked if he was ready to order. Without sparing her a glance, he spoke, his voice low and calm. "Black coffee." Nodding, she made her way to the counter, trying not to feel too out of place in the presence of a man who seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. As she brought his coffee to him, she didn't expect much. Customers like him usually just took their drinks and left, not a word exchanged. But as he reached into his wallet to pay, something fell out, a small photograph. It fluttered to the floor, face up, as Clara watched in frozen disbelief. Her heart skipped a beat. There, staring up at her from the worn, yellow-winged photo, was a face she hadn't seen in years. A face she knew all too well, her mother's face. For a moment, everything around her seemed to vanish. The clink of dishes, the hum of the fridge, the faint sound of rain tapping against the windows, all of it faded into the background. She bent down slowly, her hands trembling as she picked up the photo. Her mother. How could this man have a picture of her? A simple woman from Ohio who had lived her life quietly, far removed from the world of billionaires and power. The man's eyes flicked up at her as she held the photo in her shaking hands. His blue gaze locked onto hers, cold and detached. "Where did you get this?" she whispered, her voice barely a breath. His lips tightened, but he didn't answer immediately. Instead, his fingers brushed hers as he took the photograph back, his face unreadable. "You must be mistaken," he said flatly, sliding the photo back into his wallet as if it meant nothing. Clara's heart pounded. No, she wasn't mistaken. She knew that face. She knew it better than her own. And the question burning in her chest was only one. Why does this man have a picture of my mother? Clara couldn't shake the image of the photograph from her mind. It lingered in her thoughts as she cleaned the counter, every motion mechanical, but her mind was far from the task at hand. Her mother, Olivia Jennings, had never been part of a world like this. She was just a small-town woman from Ohio, a quiet soul who had raised Clara alone, working double shifts at the local diner, always keeping her head down and her heart open. There was no hint of wealth or power in Olivia's life. She had no connections to the kind of people who wore suits worth more than Clara's yearly rent. So why had this man, a stranger with sharp features and cold blue eyes, had her mother's photograph? Clara's mind raced as she replayed the moment in her head over and over. The way he had stood so confidently, so untouched by the world around him. The way his eyes had glanced at her, then quickly dismissed her, as if she were some fleeting inconvenience. And then, the photo, her mother's face. Her heart twisted painfully in her chest. That gentle smile, the soft eyes that always comforted Clara after a long day, the same woman who had been everything to her. How could this man know her? The hours stretched long as Clara's shift dragged on. She moved through motions, refilling drinks, clearing plates, but her mind wouldn't quiet. By the time the diner finally emptied, she had made a decision. She needed to know the truth. Who was he? How did he know her mother? Why had he kept her picture? She couldn't let it go. Not now. Not when there were so many questions swirling in her head. That night, after locking the diner door and saying goodbye to the last of the customers, Clara sat at her tiny kitchen table, staring at her phone. She didn't know where to start. She had no name, no clue, just the image of his face in her memory. She ran a quick search for wealthy men in the area, real estate tycoons, business moguls, anyone who might have a life far beyond her own. But nothing stood out. She felt frustration building, but she refused to give up. As the night wore on, her eyes flickered to a name, a Richard Lawson, the CEO of Lawson Global Enterprises, a real estate mogul with properties stretching across the city. She clicked on the link, her breath catching in her throat as his face appeared on the screen. It was him. She stared at his sharp features, his piercing blue eyes, but as she read the articles, a chill ran down her spine. There was no mention of her mother, no connection. Clara leaned back in her chair, her mind buzzing. Richard Lawson wasn't just some stranger. He was someone important. And the more she thought about it, the more certain she became. He knew her mother, and he had erased every trace of her. Clara's mind was a whirlwind of questions and anger. She couldn't stop thinking about Richard Lawson, the billionaire with the icy blue eyes and the cold indifference. The way he had slipped a photo of her mother back into his wallet like it was nothing. Like her mother, Olivia, meant nothing. But Clara couldn't just let it slide. Not when she knew, deep down, that there was more to the story. The next morning, she was up before the sun, the weight of what she had to do pressing down on her. She was done sitting at home, scrolling through articles and playing detective from behind a screen. If she wanted answers, she had to face Richard Lawson himself. She knew it was a long shot, but if there was any chance she could get him to talk, she had to try. She dressed quickly, jeans and old jacket, nothing fancy, and headed out the door, barely noticing the cool morning air as she made her way to the bus stop. Her stomach was tight with nerves, but there was a fire inside her now, a fire that wouldn't let her rest until she had the truth. By the time she reached the towering glass building of Lawson Global Enterprises, the city was waking up, its streets filling with the rush of cars and people. The building loomed in front of her, intimidating and sleek, a symbol of everything she had never been a part of. But Clara didn't care about that. This wasn't about her place in the world. It was about her mother and Richard Lawson's lies. She walked to the front doors, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. The receptionist barely looked up as Clara approached the desk, her posture stiff. "I need to see Richard Lawson," Clara said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. The woman raised an eyebrow. "Do you have an appointment?" Clara didn't miss a beat. "No, but it's important." The receptionist sighed, her expression unchanging. "Mr. Lawson doesn't take walk-ins." Clara's frustration flared, but she kept her cool. She couldn't afford to make a scene, not yet. Her eyes darted around the lobby. There had to be another way in. That's when she saw him, a young man, probably in his mid-20s, walking toward the elevator, distracted by a coffee cup in one hand and a folder in the other. This was it. Clara made her move, walking up to him with a smile that was just the right mix of charm and urgency. "Hey," she called out, stepping in front of him. "Wait up. You forgot to send me that report Mr. Lawson was expecting this morning." The man blinked at her, startled. "What?" Clara gave an exaggerated sigh. "The report Mr. Lawson needs for his 9 a.m. meeting. He's going to be upset if I don't get it to him." Before he could respond, Clara slipped past him, smoothly following his steps as he used a security badge to enter the turnstile. The guard didn't even look twice as she followed, her heart racing. She was in. The elevator doors closed, and Clara pressed a button for the top floor. This was it, the moment of truth. She wasn't going to leave until Richard Lawson had to answer her questions. She didn't know how she was going to make him talk, but she was done waiting. It was time for him to face the past he'd tried so hard to bury. Clara's heart pounded as the elevator door slid open, revealing the sleek, modern lobby of Lawson Global Enterprises. It was like stepping into another world, one of polished floors and glass walls that reached the sky. Everything about the place screamed money. Expensive art on the walls, immaculate decor, and an atmosphere that made Clara feel like a fish out of water. But she didn't care. She wasn't here for the luxuries of the building. She was here for answers. She stepped out of the elevator, her breath shallow, hands clenched at her sides. The lobby was nearly empty, save for a few employees hurrying by, their suits sharp and professional. Clara's mind raced as she walked toward the reception desk, her feet almost slipping on the smooth floor. She had no appointment, no reason to be here other than a gut feeling that she had to be. She had to confront Richard Lawson, the man who had stolen her peace of mind with a single photograph. A receptionist looked up from her desk, barely acknowledging Clara's presence. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice as indifferent as the rest of the building. Clara's jaw tightened, but she kept her composure. "I need to see Richard Lawson," she said, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her chest. "It's urgent. It's about my mother." The receptionist didn't even flinch, but her eyes narrowed slightly as she took in Clara's appearance. Jeans, an old jacket, and a quiet desperation in her eyes. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Clara said, meeting her gaze, "but this can't wait." The woman sighed heavily, her fingers tapping on the keyboard. "Mr. Lawson doesn't take walk-ins." Clara's patience, already thin from the anxiety of the morning, snapped. But she wasn't about to back down now. She quickly scanned the room and caught sight of a young man carrying a coffee cup and a stack of papers. He was in his mid-20s, distracted, and most importantly, he had a security badge clipped to his jacket. Clara made her move. "Excuse me," she called, stepping forward with a fake smile plastered on her face. "You forgot to send Mr. Lawson a report for his 9 a.m. meeting." The man blinked, clearly confused. "What?" Clara sighed, feigning frustration. "You're not going to make him wait, are you? It's the report he's been expecting all morning. You know how Mr. Lawson gets." Before he could say another word, Clara slipped past him just as he swiped his badge through the turnstile. The security guard didn't even give her a second glance. Clara's heart raced as she followed the man into the building, adrenaline rushing through her veins. She was in. The elevator doors closed, and Clara pressed a button for the top floor. As it began its ascent, she leaned back against the cool metal wall, her breath quickening. This was it, the final stretch. If she could just make it to Richard Lawson's office, she would finally get the truth she so desperately needed, and she wouldn't leave until he gave it to her. Clara's heart raced as the elevator doors opened, revealing a long, polished hallway leading to Richard Lawson's office. The sleek modern decor of the building had given way to a more personal touch. The soft lighting, the glass walls, the polish that made everything feel cold and distant. Yet Clara couldn't afford to let herself be intimidated. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to turn back now. Her shoes clicked sharply on the marble floor as she walked past a few silent employees who barely acknowledged her presence. She couldn't help but feel out of place. Just another small-town girl in a world of billionaires and power players. But she knew one thing. None of that mattered. She wasn't here for the wealth or the suits. She was here for answers. She had come for the truth about her mother and the man who had her picture in his wallet. At the end of the hall, two massive wooden doors stood ajar, and Clara felt her pulse quicken. This was it. This was the moment that could change everything. She took a deep breath and pushed the doors open. Inside was Richard Lawson's office, a sprawling, luxurious space with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city below. The view was breathtaking, but Clara's attention was fixed on the man standing by the desk. He was tall, confident, with the same cold blue eyes she'd seen the night before. He looked just like the man in the photo, except now she could see the weariness in his face, the tension in his jaw. Richard Lawson didn't look surprised to see her. If anything, he looked almost resigned, like he had known this moment was coming for a long time. He didn't speak right away, but Clara didn't wait for an invitation. She stepped inside, shutting the door behind her, her eyes never leaving his. "Why do you have a picture of my mother?" she demanded, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and confusion. She wasn't going to back down, not now, not after everything she had learned. Richard hesitated, his gaze flickering to the photo of Olivia Jennings that still haunted Clara's mind. Then, without a word, he walked over to his desk and retrieved the wallet. He opened it slowly, as if taking his time to relive something painful. When he pulled out the photograph, Clara's heart dropped. There was the same photograph she had seen in his wallet, the one her mother had kept hidden all these years. It was no mistake. For a moment, the silence between them was thick, suffocating. Then Richard exhaled sharply, his voice quiet but steady. "I didn't just know your mother," he said, his words hanging in the air. "I loved her." Clara's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't prepared for this revelation that turned everything she thought she knew upside down. For a brief second, she could barely process his words. The man who had been so cold to her, the man who had kept her mother's photograph like a forgotten memory, was telling her he had loved Olivia. The pieces were falling into place, but the puzzle was still incomplete. Clara wasn't going to let him off that easily. She stepped forward, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. "Then why did you leave her?" Richard Lawson's eyes darkened as Clara's question echoed in the air. His jaw tightened, and for the first time since she'd entered his office, his confident demeanor cracked just slightly. He looked away, as if the weight of his past was a burden he had long tried to shake off. Clara stood her ground, waiting, but every second of silence felt like an eternity. The view of the city beyond the glass walls seemed distant, as if it belonged to another world altogether, one where things like love and betrayal were more than just distant concepts. But she wasn't in that world. She was here in this cold, sterile office, facing a man who had just admitted to loving her mother, yet had walked away from her. Finally, Richard spoke, his voice quieter now, tinged with regret. "I had to leave her," he said, his words slow and deliberate. "My family made it clear. If I stayed with Olivia, I would lose everything, my inheritance, my position in the company, everything I had worked for." Clara's chest tightened. The words stung in a way she hadn't expected, as if someone had ripped the veil off of her mother's life and revealed a harsh reality she'd never known. Olivia had always been the one to shield Clara from the pain of her past, to protect her from the secrets that Richard now casually admitted. To think that her mother had been forced to make a choice between love and survival was more than Clara could bear. "You left her for money?" Clara's voice was barely above a whisper, the disbelief flooding her mind. How could he have done that? How could he have chosen the world of suits and skyscrapers over the woman who had loved him? Richard's face twisted with something close to pain. "I thought I could come back for her," he admitted, the weight of his words pressing down on him. "I thought that once I had secured my future, once I had everything in place, I could come back and make things right. But by the time I was ready, Olivia was gone." Clara felt a pang in her chest, a strange mix of anger and sorrow. It wasn't just about the money. It was the years of waiting, of making promises to himself that he would fix things when the time was right. But time, Clara knew, didn't work that way. It didn't wait. It didn't give you second chances when you decided you were finally ready. And Olivia, her mother, had paid the price for his indecision. "She never told me about you," Clara said, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. "Not once." "Why?" Richard looked down, a deep sigh escaping his lips. "Because she wanted to protect you. From me. From the mess I made." Clara's mind raced. Her mother had kept this secret for all these years, hiding it from her to spare her the pain. And now, here she was, face to face with a man who had shattered everything. The anger boiled inside her, but there was something else too, a strange understanding, a recognition that maybe, just maybe, her mother had done what she thought was best. Clara wasn't ready to forgive him, but she understood why Olivia had kept him hidden from her. She clenched her fists, fighting back the flood of emotions. "You'll never be able to fix what you've done," she said, her voice firm. "But I want answers. I deserve them." Richard nodded, his face hardening with determination. "I'll give them to you," he said quietly. "But understand this. What I did because I thought it was the only way. And I've spent the years since regretting it every single day." Clara studied him carefully, tried to read the truth in his eyes. She wasn't sure she was ready to forgive him, but she was ready to hear the rest of the story. This was only the beginning, and she wasn't about to let him walk away again. Clara felt the tension in the room tighten with every word Richard spoke, as if the weight of his confession was slowly suffocating her. The revelation that Olivia, her mother, had kept the secret of Richard's existence the man who had loved her and then abandoned her, was enough to send Clara's mind into a whirlwind. But what came next shook her even more. Richard's admission that he had searched for Olivia after he left. He had spent years trying to find her, hoping for a second chance, only to discover she had vanished without a trace. "I tried, Clara. I really did," Richard continued, his voice softer now, almost as though he was speaking to himself more than to her. "I didn't know she was pregnant. If I had known about you at all," his voice faltered, and Clara could hear the pain in his words, even if his eyes remained cold and unreadable. Clara shook her head, the words not quite registering. The idea of Richard Lawson, the man who could buy and sell entire city blocks with a snap of his fingers, desperately searching for her mother for them, was almost too surreal to believe. It didn't make sense. If he had truly loved Olivia, why had he let go so easily? Why hadn't he fought for her? "You didn't know about me?" Clara asked, her voice rising slightly. "You didn't know about your own child?" The question stung as it left her lips, but she couldn't stop herself. It didn't make sense. Was this man, who had so much power and influence, really so blind to his own past? Richard's face darkened. He shifted uncomfortably, his fingers tapping on the edge of his desk as he tried to find the right words. "I wasn't a good man back then. I was arrogant, entitled, and I believed I could always come back when the timing was right. But Olivia," she didn't wait. "She didn't want to be found. She erased me from her life completely. And when I tried to find her, it was like she had disappeared from the world." Clara's chest tightened with a combination of disbelief and anger. Olivia, her mother, had spent years running from the past, from Richard, from the man who had shattered everything. She had done it to protect Clara, to keep her safe from the mistakes of a man who had no idea what real love meant. But as Clara stared at Richard, she felt the bitter sting of realization. Her mother had been a shield, protecting her from the very truth Clara now had to face. "So, she erased you," Clara said, her voice shaking with emotion. "But you didn't erase her. You just walked away." Richard's eyes flickered with an emotion that Clara couldn't quite place, but it was gone before she could analyze it. "I wasn't strong enough to stay," he said quietly. "And by the time I realized what I had lost, it was too late." The air between them felt thick, and for the first time, Clara didn't know how to feel. This man who had caused so much pain now seemed to be haunted by his choices. And yet, there was a part of her that couldn't forgive him. She couldn't simply accept the truth and move on. Not yet. Clara stepped back, trying to keep her composure. "You don't get to erase the past, Richard," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "And you don't get to decide when it's time to fix things. You had your chance. My mother didn't." Richard's face softened, but there was nothing he could say. Clara knew that this was only the beginning. The answers she sought were still elusive, but the path ahead was clear. She wasn't walking away, not without knowing everything, and she would find the rest of the truth, no matter how hard it was to face. The silence between Clara and Richard hung in the air like thick fog, pressing down on them with an almost suffocating weight. Clara felt the edges of her frustration fraying, but there was something in Richard's eyes, a flicker of remorse, a trace of regret, that made her hesitate. For all his wealth, his power, his polished facade, he was still just a man who had made mistakes. Yet those mistakes had cost her mother dearly, and they had left Clara with a past full of unanswered questions. As the minutes dragged on, Richard leaned back in his chair, his face falling into a deep frown. He looked as if he were reliving some long-forgotten memory, some painful chapter he wished had never existed. Clara, however, wasn't going to wait for him to work through his emotions. She needed answers, and she needed them now. "So what's the truth, Richard?" she asked, her voice steady but sharp. "You loved my mother, but you let her go for money, for power. You thought you could come back and make things right. But by the time you were ready, she was gone. Is that it?" Richard's eyes met hers again, but this time there was no avoiding the hurt. "That's part of it," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of years of guilt. "But there's more to it than that. After I left, I kept searching for her. I spent years tracking down any lead, trying to find her. But she didn't want to be found. She didn't want me to find her. It's like she erased me from her life completely. And I couldn't change that. Clara shook her head, the raw pain of his words clashing with the burning anger inside her. She had imagined 1,000 reasons for why Richard had left. None of them good, but all of them more believable than this. She had imagined him as a coward, as someone too weak to stand by her mother. But this was different. He had searched for Olivia, only to be shut out. Her mother had made sure he couldn't find her, couldn't fix things. And Clara realized, with an unsettling clarity, that Olivia had done it to protect her. To protect both of them. Why didn't she ever tell me about you? Clara asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Richard's expression tightened, the emotion in his eyes flickering before he spoke. She never wanted you to know me, he said softly. She didn't think you should have to know about the mistakes I made. She wanted you to have a better life, one where I wasn't part of it. Clara's chest ached at the words. The realization that her mother had shielded her from Richard, from the pain of knowing the truth, hit harder than she had expected. Olivia had spent years hiding the past, burying it so deep that even Clara had no idea what lay beneath. But now, standing here in this cold office, Clara understood why. She understood that her mother had done it out of love, out of the desperate desire to protect her from a man who had failed them both. Her throat tightened as she looked at Richard, the man who had once been her mother's everything, the man who had loved her, and yet had caused so much pain. For the first time, Clara felt a strange, almost reluctant sympathy for him. I don't know if I can forgive you, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. But I need to understand everything. The truth. All of it. Richard nodded, his eyes softening just slightly. I'll tell you everything, Clara. I owe you that much. Clara stood there for a long moment, the weight of her decision sinking in. This wasn't just about forgiveness. It was about finding the pieces of her past that had been lost for so long. It was about understanding who she was, who her mother had been, and what it meant for future. She wasn't walking away. Not now. Not when the truth was within reach. Clara stood in the middle of Richard Lawson's office, her mind spinning with everything she had just learned. The weight of his confession hung in the air, thick and heavy. He had loved her mother, Olivia, but had let her go for reasons that, while painful, were rooted in fear and insecurity. It wasn't just about money, though that had been a huge factor. It was about the world Richard had chosen belonged to a world that had no room for love unless it came with the right status, the right connections. But now, after all these years, the pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place. I need you to understand something, Richard, Clara said, her voice low but steady. She was calm, but inside, she was a storm. I don't care about your money. I don't care about your power. I care about my mother, about the years she spent hiding from you, protecting me from you. Richard's face tightened at the mention of Olivia, and Clara could see the struggle inside him, but he didn't interrupt. He knew she had every right to be angry. He had taken everything from them, the chance to build a life together, the chance to make things right. He had left Olivia to fight alone, and by doing so, had condemned Clara to a life of unanswered questions. I get it, Richard said after a long silence, his voice heavy with remorse. Olivia did what she thought was best. I can't undo the past. I can't bring back the years we lost. But what I can do is answer the questions you've had all your life. I owe you that, at least. Clara felt the anger in her chest begin to burn even hotter. No, Richard, she said, taking a deep breath. What you owe me isn't just answers. You owe me honesty. You owe me the truth about why you left, why you thought you could walk away from a family and just come back when it suited you. That's not how life works. It's not that simple. The lesson was clear, echoing in her mind. The past can't be erased, no matter how much we wish it could be. You can't run from the consequences of your actions forever. And sometimes, the people who claim to love us are the ones who hurt us the most. But the hardest lesson of all? Forgiveness doesn't come easily, especially when a wound is still fresh. It's not about excusing what was done, but about learning to live with it, learning to move forward, even when the past is a shadow we can't outrun. Richard nodded slowly, his eyes betraying a glimpse of something deeper than guilt, something close to understanding. "You're right," he said quietly, "and I can't expect you to forgive me. Not yet. But I'm here, Clara. I want to help you understand, even if I can't change what happened." Clara looked at him, her gaze unwavering. She didn't know if she could forgive him. Not yet. But the truth was, she didn't have to. The only thing she could do now was take control of her own future, one step at a time. The past wasn't going to define her, and it wasn't going to control her. "I don't know what comes next," Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. "But I'm not letting the past define me. I'm not letting it keep me from living the life I choose." Richard's eyes softened. "And that's the hardest lesson of all," he whispered. For the first time in years, Clara felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She wasn't holding on to the past anymore. It was time to move forward. And maybe, just maybe, she could begin to rebuild a life. Not with Richard, but with the lessons she had learned along the way. Clara left Richard Lawson's office that afternoon with more questions than answers, but somehow it didn't matter. As she walked down the long corridor, the weight in her chest felt lighter. She had come for the truth, and although she hadn't gotten everything she had hoped for, she had learned something far more important: the power of choice. As the elevator doors slid shut behind her, Clara thought about everything she had learned over the past few days. Richard's confession had been raw, vulnerable, and full of regret. He had been the man who walked away, who let his fear and ambition dictate his life. He had chosen wealth and security over love, over the life he could have had with Olivia. And yet, here he was years later, still searching for something he'd lost: a family, a chance at redemption. But Clara knew the truth now. Redemption didn't come easily, and it certainly didn't come wrapped in the promises of a billionaire's empire. The lesson, Clara realized, was that redemption was not something that could be earned by money or power. It was earned through the choices you made every day. The choices to show up, to own your mistakes, and to work toward making things right. But there was another lesson that stood out louder than all the rest. The people who loved you the most were often the ones who suffered because of your choices. Her mother, Olivia, had been the silent warrior, carrying the burden of a past she couldn't undo, protecting Clara from a world that had once been filled with promises, but had ended in abandonment. Clara could now see how much strength her mother had shown by making the decision to raise her alone, to make sure she never had to face the heartbreak Richard had caused. It wasn't just the love of a mother. It was the love of someone who knew that sometimes the hardest choice was to walk away, even when your heart told you to stay. Clara paused as she stepped outside into the cool afternoon air. The city was bustling, the streets alive with the sounds of the world moving forward, just like her life would now. She wasn't ready to forgive Richard. Not yet. But she was ready to forgive herself. For holding on to the bitterness. For blaming herself for things that were never hers to control. She was ready to let go of the past, even if she wasn't ready to fully embrace the future. The lesson was clear. Life wasn't about erasing the past or trying to rewrite the mistakes of others. It was about learning from them, understanding their impact, and choosing to move forward with strength and grace. Clara had the power to define her own future. It was time to take that first step. With a deep breath, she walked down the street, her heart finally at peace with the choices she had made. The story of her past had ended, but the story of her future? That was just beginning.